Welcome, everyone. This is Beer Guys Radio. Thank you so much for joining us. Always good to hang out and have a couple beers and some good conversation. The hump day. It's always good to celebrate hump day with some good conversation and a beer. We're going to be talking with Kevin McGee, President and CEO of Anderson Valley Brewing Company. Kevin, we appreciate you coming and hanging with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to get right into starting the show here. If you've got any questions, comments, please do feel free to leave them. We'll try and keep an eye on things and address any questions that you've got there. But with that said, here we go. Welcome to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We are happy to be here. We're happy to have you with us. We're going to enjoy a beer. We're going to enjoy some good conversation. And this week's special treat, we're talking to Anderson Valley Brewing Company, Kevin McGee, President and CEO. Kevin, how are things out there in beautiful California?
Things are drizzly, actually, at the moment.
Drizzly out there now. Okay. Yeah, we've been dealing with some of that over here, too. So I get that. You know, funny, I don't know why, and I don't know if this is just me or if anybody else has ever said this, but kind of the branding and the personality of Anderson Valley, I always kind of associated that with kind of Appalachia. And I always thought you were an Asheville brewer. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know, it just feels like, is that just either one, Nate, Brian, either one of you ever, does that strike you that way? Or is that just my personal weirdness?
I think I always knew that they were from California. But I can kind of see why you might think that, because there is a certain remote kind of hunting and fishing theme to it. I mean, you do have a bear with antlers on most of the bottles, so that kind of fits in nicely. It's not exactly a mounted fish singing on a wall, but it's close.
It's close there. That's Well, you know, for anybody not in California, we think of SoCal, San Francisco, Los Angeles, big city, Hollywood, you know, all of that, I think is the, you know, unless you're maybe a wine drinker, you know, and you think of that area or something. But I think just like you mentioned that you grew up in Buffalo, and I lived in the Finger Lakes region for a while, just outside of Syracuse in Auburn, New York. And when I moved down south, everyone's just, they see your New York place, they're like, oh, the Big Apple, huh? I'm like, nope, actually not at all. Not at all. So
I have to explain to people, Buffalo is as far away as you can get from New York City while staying in the same state.
Yeah. And culturally and geographically. So
pretty
interesting stuff. But I am Tim Dennis. Brian Hewitt, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm doing about as well as you can there. And we have producer extraordinaire Mo Mike Nate. How you doing?
Doing well. Glad to be here.
Good stuff. Guys, we had some interesting discussion on Twitter this week around non-alcoholic beer, a topic we covered a lot. Kevin, do you do an NA beer or any plans to?
We don't. We did look at it, and probably we're closer to looking at doing like a hop water.
Okay.
And an NA beer. Some of the issues with NA beers is that there's a couple specific ways you kind of need to make them if you want them to taste good. But one of the other real important considerations, you don't have the buffer of the alcohol level. And unless you have, you know, a tunnel pasteurizer or some way of doing that, you're playing with fire, and you're also potentially infecting your packaging equipment and stuff like that. So we chose not to do it. We make beer flavored beer. We do it really well. And so we stay doing that.
Stay with that. That makes sense. And I know there's been a lot of discussions around it, especially as I know there's some newer yeast that if you set up your mash bill properly, you can do a technically non-alcoholic beer without all the special equipment that it used to take. And so we are seeing some of more breweries popping up with, you know, one-offs that they do there. But I definitely understand there was an article that came around, I think kind of a attention grabbing headline there about, you know, non-alcoholic beer being just a festering ground for, you know, bacteria in that. But you get into the article and you see that they put them in there, you know, intentionally. It's not like it just popped up there and grew some legs and climbed out of the can. That may happen. I don't know. I haven't let one sit around long enough to find out. But I think some of the big news on Twitter, and this is going back and forth, Brian, I've seen bloggers, writers, whatever you want to say, talk about this, but for several years now, they've been saying NA beer is going to be the next big thing. And by some people's measuring stick, they just repeatedly like to knock it down and say, it's not. And when is it going to be? But I think you dug into kind of some of the data. Bart Watson from the Brewers Association made some comments. Jeff Allworth from Beervana had some thoughts there. But what's the details on that?
So it's Bart Watson started it off by showing the growth of non-alcoholic beer over the course of was it 4 week? It's over the course of several years, and it showed a spike in like the January, the early parts of the year, and each year the spike gets a little higher and stays, and then the leveling out stays higher than the previous spike, which indicates really good growth. So that's one way of looking at it, is a percentage growth. But the other way of looking at it is if you actually see the percentage of the actual share of the entire beer market, it's still less than 1%. So these big percentage growths it's still under 1%. So Bart Watson is saying this is big. They're big growth here. And if you had a hit non-alcoholic beer right now, because there's not that many options out there, there's a lot more than there used to be, you could really see big sales as an individual. But overall, the market is not into non-alcoholic beer at all. So percentage growth big, actual percentage of the market very, very small. So depending on how you look at the numbers, you could say it's nothing, or you could say it's exploding. So it's interesting. It's an interesting study in how statistics can be used to lie or mislead or whatever. And I don't think either perspective is wrong. It's growing big, but at the same time, it's very small. So,
Kevin, what are your thoughts on that as a brewer, as I guess just the NA sector and NA beer in general?
Yeah, actually, we were just talking about this. I was at the California Craft Brewers Association. Does a summit every year, and it was 2 weeks ago or something like that. I'm on the board. And we were talking about this very specifically, and it feels like the NA category is, it's a material business for the people that are kind of in it. So even though it's I think it's 0.8 or 0.7% of 0.8 or 0.7 of a percent of the craft beer, category, and it doesn't feel like it's got a lot more room to go. Once you start cresting those kind of volume levels, then really what you're doing, you're competing against soft drinks, and you're competing against a lot of other stuff, and you're competing against people with the budget of Pepsi and Coke. So, it's kind of a tough thing to break out of those volume levels. But one of the other interesting things that's happening is that some of the early movers that have a lot of market share aren't really good tasting non-alcoholic beers. And some of the folks that are really good at what they do have looked at it, and there's a proof of concept for this category where, obviously it's not, life-changing for some of the larger brewers, but folks like one great example, Sierra just came out with a line of non-alcoholic beers that are really good. And so, now that, they're kind of coming in there, you're going to find these sort of flavor differentiations, you're going to find some quality differentiations you might not have had, maybe a year ago. And so I think you're going to see that some of the players that are dominating, either, somewhere in the top 10 spots, they're going to shuffle around a little bit as some, frankly, higher quality products start getting introduced and replacing some of the others. But I don't think that NA beer is really going to crest too much. In Europe's got a totally different, drinking, scenario and relationship with beer and the flavor of beer than America does. So don't know if it's going to rise to the level that, is over there. I'm kind of suspicious it won't. But that's, that was part of the conversation that we were having, and a bunch of folks sitting around talking about it, sipping some stuff and tasting a few things. And that was kind of our consensus.
Interesting. And, I think kind of key is there's a different consumer here for this. And I think if you compare it to the overall beer sector, it's always going to be on the losing end of things there. I mean, maybe not the perfect analogy, but that's like comparing maybe Beyond Meat to steak or hamburger performance or whatever. It's like, hey, there's a certain audience that eats these Beyond Burgers. And there is a little bit, if you throw the Venn diagram there's a little bit of crossover on the two. But if you look at NA beer growth in and of itself, and the options available to the consumer, the options available out there for people who don't drink for whatever reason it is. I had a friend that was pregnant and she didn't want to drink, alcoholic beverages, but she wanted to have a beer. There's options out there for that now. There's sometimes when we have been sitting around and we have a few beers and we're like, all right, I need a little bit of break here. Maybe you feel a little tipsy and you're like, I don't want to take this to the next level, but I wouldn't mind having another beer, kind of mixing it in with that. So, I don't think it's fair, really. Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
No, it's okay. No, I was talking to a writer and a journalist, and he had the best, and he's, has forgotten more about beer than most of us will ever know. And he probably had one of the best explanations, is that I want more beers than I want drinks. And,
fair.
Because of that, it's like, okay. And from our perspective, at Anderson, it's like, that's the person who is doing that is still our consumer. That's just not our occasion for that. And so people have different times of day. They have different, life cycles and things like that, where they might choose to do that. But it's, I think it's slowed down a lot more. But in the early days of Dry January, there was a lot of us versus them kind of things. And there wasn't the recognition that these are the same people that, are your customers. If you're a brewery that's making, normal, non-NA, beer. And it's not a kind of an us versus them sort of thing. I think it's getting recognized that it's more synergistic and in some ways I think it's, it's complementary. And there's some of the outfits out there that, are really good, really strong technical brewers that are releasing some of these beers that really taste good. I think are finding that, and they're finding that, it's a self-supporting kind of thing. And it's, it's about, beer. It's about the flavors you can bring when you've got, a malt beverage that you're fermenting.
I think it's been interesting. I think it's been interesting watching the NA sector, the growth in that. We started chatting with the guys at Athletic Brewing when they were pretty young, and to see the growth that they've had there and just the options. So it'll be interesting to see how people continue to discuss it and critique it over the years.
Yeah.
It's definitely the same group, because we've got a buddy who regularly stops drinking entirely and will drink some NA stuff. But then when he's back on, he's chasing all the hazies and, specific hype beer. So they definitely are your same people. And January is just their way of trying to maintain their health so they can, the other 11 months of the year, enjoy beer frivolously. I don't know. However they're doing whatever they need to do to take an entire month off to recover. That's what they're doing. So
yeah, it's like an extension of the way that I think we've kind of come around to thinking about people who drink, seltzers and things like that too, is that this could still be our customers, just not our occasion. The promiscuity of, the craft beer drinker in general. Like if you're a big craft beer fan, it means you want to taste a lot of different things and you want to do a lot of stuff. There isn't, you don't find a lot of craft beer drinkers doing the things like where they get the Coors tattoo on the back of their calf, like my old UPS driver used to have and stuff. And you don't have that. And if you don't embrace that and the idea that, you want those kind of people who have, curiosity and, desire to kind of learn and experience and see different things and that kind of stuff. You want those people to be the people that recognize you rather than, alienate them. And so, it's like the way we looked at, seltzers. We didn't put out a seltzer. That's not what we do. But again, it's like it may not be our occasion, but still could be our customer. And so that's kind of the way we look at it. I think NA is pretty close to that.
Interesting stuff. Fun to watch it and see what goes on. So, Brian, I don't want to take too much time, but I feel like your soul would be hurt if we didn't mention that you found a 200-and-some-year-old beer Solera.
Yeah, I saw it. It got published to Craft Beer and Brewing. Lars Marius Garschall, he's a international beer treasure, and he discovered in all of the research he does in the Scandinavian countries over there that there are places in Sweden, some estates or manors, if you will, that maintain beer Soleras or have historically done it. And he found mentions of it going back as early as 1794. And he traced the documentation of that particular beer Solera, and it lasted at least until 1952. So like 150 plus years of a beer cellar. And I've been really into the whole concept, and I've talked to brewers and joked about them doing them. And yeah, everybody's like laughed along and said, yeah, there's no chance we're going to do it. But I love the fact that there are places where people have actually done it. So they call them 100-year beers. There's a Swedish term for it I can't pronounce, but it's very rare now. But there is one family out there that still makes them. And they inherited their barrel in the 1990s, and it goes back to like 1806. And it reportedly tastes like Rodenbach Grand Cru. And if you go to the right Belgian-themed beer festival in Sweden, you might get to try it, because they actually bring some of their beer to these festivals. So it's still out there if you really want to find some 100-year beer. So that's it. I'm satisfied now.
Are you headed to Sweden, Brian? You headed to Sweden?
You know, I'm tempted, but it also makes me just want to drink some Rodenbach Grand Cru. So
fair enough. Awesome. Yeah. Well, guys, the beers that we are getting into this week were very Anderson Valley heavy, of course. But Brian, you did a little pre-gaming with some St. Patty's leftovers. It looks like a little Harp Lager there, and then of course both you and I think we have similar beers. Brian, we've got the Blacklight, which we'll talk about that more. Kevin, that's your new one. You know, a lighter black. That's an L, correct? L or lager on that. That's a lighter black ale. And I also have, Brian has the salted caramel porter, and it's actually the first one I went for. Maybe I should have started with the Blacklight, but I wanted to get this one first in case I didn't have room for another beer tonight. So make sure to get that in. Yeah, go that way with it for sure. Nate has got a few there, some different ones than we have. He has Boontling, which is their amber ale. And he has the Hop Otten, which is an IPA, and the Barney Flats Oatmeal Stout. And shout out to the Beer Growler in Brookhaven, Georgia. We were there last weekend, and they had the Barney Flats on draft. And that's just, Kevin, it's getting so hard to just find a basic stout. They want to put salted caramel or something into them these days. And, you got to and I love those as well, but sometimes just a good oatmeal stout is just really, really nice and hits the spot. And that one was quite nice.
That definitely scratches that traditional like oatmeal stout, no frills, but well done itch. And that's an itch that I realize I have these days because everything's pastry, everything. But you're going to say something, Kevin. I catch you.
The Barney Flats, the oatmeal stout is one of the oldest beers that the brewery makes. It's probably, I think the recipe is about 35 years old. And it's a classic. It's probably our most awarded beer. It won a platinum medal from something. I didn't even know they gave out platinum medals, but it's won World Beer Cup, GABF, and all the other kinds of golds that are out there. And it's just an exceptional beer. We do quality control tastings every day here, so we taste everything 3 times in its process before it leaves the loading dock. And every time I get Barney Flats, I'm like, this is a really, really good beer. I mean, it just really stands out even among the stuff that we're doing. And I like the dark beers too. So, and we like actually all 3 of those, the Boontling, the Hop Otten IPA, and the Barney Flats are all like 30-plus-year-old things. Actually, the Boontling was the first beer ever made at Anderson in 1987. And it's been our number one, our flagship beer ever since.
87. That's ancient in American craft beer.
Pre-Deschutes. Or they 88. Deschutes was 88, and you're 87. That's really getting back there.
Good stuff. Well, Brian, let's give a shout out to our sponsors real quick, and then we will dig into Anderson Valley. And Brian, spring is here. We did it officially, not just the temperatures, but spring is here. The birds are chirping. The plants are growing. In Atlanta, that means pollen. And so we've got pollen all over everything. But I think what most people probably associate with spring and are most excited for, that also means baseball. And so the regular season is kicked off. We followed up. Braves going to be playing at Truist Park. And Brian, if you're out there catching a Braves game, you definitely want to stop in the Terrapin Tap Room, Atlanta, and have you a beer or two. They're going to be cold, refreshing beers available either inside or outside the stadium. That's something some people may not know, is if you go to a game at Truist Park, you can go to Terrapin Tap Room and get a beer from them when you're inside of the stadium. And the prices are friendly too. You're not going to pay $150 for a tall boy of a macro lager if you go to Terrapin. You have a good time. And if you want to show your team spirit, grab you a Los Bravos Mexican lager there. Or if you want to look for something else, a lot of times they have a little collab they did with Chipper Jones on the CJ10 Kolsch maybe on there. Nate, did you know they've actually done collaborations with a few Braves alumni?
Like the French's Blues, Blueberry, Wheat.
That's right. They've got Frenchie's Blues, which is made with blueberries from the Jeff Francoeur's family farm, even.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and they also did a triple buzz there that is made a collaboration with bees. That they actually, yeah, there was a swarm out in left field. They collected them and took them to Peter Moylan's family farm. And then the honey produced by those bees, Moylan collaborated with Terrapin to do a honey triple with that. So cool. There's also always the Farm System series of beers that they have. They're trying out new hop varieties, whatever you want to drink, whatever the weather is, whatever the pollen count is like. If you're out there for a Braves game or not, make sure to stop by Terrapin Brewery Atlanta and enjoy a pint.
And like Tim said, we are in the thick of it, both springtime and pollen. So I'm thinking about also heading over to Truck and Tap to have some beers that are good enough to make me forget about all that dirty pollen out there. And here are the beers that I'm eyeballing right now at Truck and Tap. Since we're talking to Anderson Valley this week, it only makes sense that we would pick their briny melon goza at Truck and Tap Woodstock, because a watermelon goza sounds like a great warm weather drink. So that'll help me forget. At the Duluth location, I'm rolling the dice and trying Wild Heaven's Neon Roses. It's a mint julep-inspired wheat wine that's aged in bullet bourbon barrels. And as much as I talk about wheat wines, I feel obligated to pick this one. It is a roll of the dice. I've had it before and had thoughts. So I'm willing to try it again because I love wheat wine that much. At Truck and Tap Alpharetta, I'm fighting back against the pollen in the most severe way I can with Heavy Seas Triple Cannon IPA. It's a multi-assertive, hoppy, and boozy IPA, and the pollen just doesn't stand a chance against all of that power. And finally, at the Lawrenceville location, my pick is Six Bridges Basic Bunny, because Easter is coming up, and the peanut butter marshmallow chocolate pastry stout kind of makes me think of the bunnies in Easter baskets. So that's what I'm going for. That's so you have it. There are my picks. Drop by your local Truck and Tap, give one a try, or try any of the 20 beers they have on tap. You don't have to take my picks, but I think you should. The world is your pollen-dusted oyster, as they say. And thank you, Truck and Tap, for your support.
You know, Brian, that beer may be the best way to get your Easter treats, because I heard chocolate prices are through the roof. So everybody's stressing about putting chocolate in Easter baskets this year.
I didn't know this. Is that really a thing? Okay.
Black market Cadbury eggs or something. There. So, yeah, crazy stuff. Well, Kevin, I think we want to start with probably your newest beer here, one that we've got to sample recently. And this is, I don't think parallel is the right word to say here with the NA beers, but there's also definitely a movement within beer drinkers on lighter beers, lower alcohol, lighter beers. And you put out kind of an interesting take. A lot of folks are doing just a light lager, Pilsner or something along those lines. But we've got Black Light from Anderson Valley, and that is a 95 calorie, full flavored craft beer, a dark ale. Can you tell us more about that one?
Yeah, it's been something that our brewmaster Fal, who's been here for a long time, he comes up with different ideas and different thoughts and stuff, and different ingredients, and so he came up with this beer that was just exceptional. And it's literally, it's a light beer that tastes like if you made Negro Modelo taste good, or it's like a different variation on a stout or something like that. I mean, it is a legitimate full flavored craft beer, and it's low calories, 95 calories, like I said, which is the same as Michelob Ultra. It's low carb, and we just thought, there really isn't anything else kind of like that, and had a lot of fun with the packaging. My wife is our creative designer and director and stuff, and so we spend a lot of time thinking about how to get a package across that kind of conveys a lot of this stuff. And so we had a lot of fun doing that. It was a lot of work though. But really, it is beautiful because it's just a real simple idea. It's a beer that tastes like a full flavored craft beer, but it's actually a light beer. And there's almost very little to say, other than that. So
and you know what, that could be something that could be hard to sell people on, is a lot of people see a black beer and they think this is a heavy, high calorie, dense beer. I know Guinness all the time gets commented. People are like, oh, I couldn't drink a Guinness. That's heavy. That's so many calories. But you can get a lot of flavor, and you can get a darker beer. It doesn't have to be, clear as water. It doesn't have to be a Michelob Ultra to be a lower calorie enjoyable beer.
It's 3.8%. You can have, we really need to make our beers balanced and something that you want 2 of or 3 of or something. It's like if Fowl says, if you don't want, a second or third pint, we've missed our mark with it, and we got to go back and redesign that beer. And so the idea of making sure that flavor is balanced with alcohol, balanced with bitterness and everything else. We don't want to blow people's heads off. Even the Huge Arker, which is 15.5%, is actually a pretty smooth drinking beer. And this just, totally fits in with the classic approach that the brewery's been doing for now 36 years, but it's a way of doing it in a completely new way. It's just been a lot of fun to put out there.
Tim mentioned Guinness, and that has me thinking, I'll bet you could make the black and tan or the half and half with this as the top layer because it's so light. And that's the reason Guinness can pull that off.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried doing that? This was my last can, so I can't really do that now that I'm thinking about it, but
we've played with it. We released a Pilsner we called it the Pilsner last year. Just a Bavarian Pilsner because our brewmaster was like, I really want to make a Pilsner. I'm like, okay, they're kind of a pain in the butt and they're temperamental and everything. I'm like, why do you want to do that? We weren't really doing any lagers and stuff. And then, so he made it for the tap room and I tasted it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so mind-blowingly good. So we put that out. So yeah, we have been cocktailing the Pilsner and the Black Light from time to time, and it works. Yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Black Light, which is really interesting. That some of the secret ingredient aspects of it is we use this thing known as the forbidden rice. It's a black rice, which brings a lot of flavor and also brings, the color and then a lot of like kind of umami characteristics and stuff. And so it's actually a super versatile food beer. Surprisingly so too. It goes awesome with everything from sushi to barbecue. So it's got some of those nuances and characters. It makes it actually really good base for beer cocktails too. We're discovering more and more things out of it. We just released it pretty much nationwide in January, and we're getting feedback from people suggesting things that we never thought of. So it's been a lot of fun.
We'll have to put Nate to work on that. He's our cocktail guy, our cocktail connoisseur there. And he's so black rice, light-bodied ale. Nate, I don't know if we got you any of those. And Kevin, thanks. We did you did share some of those black lights with us. So thanks for sending those out. But I don't know if I got any tonight. I think Brian and I drank them all because
I think this is my last one. I had one in a previous show, and
they evaporate quickly.
Yeah, they did. They're like you said, it's an easy one to
light.
just have a couple there with it. So
I went to a few stores today looking for it and couldn't find it. So no, I didn't get my hands on any.
I may have a couple more, Nate. We can probably work something out here. So.
Is this the beginning of a trend, or are you going to explore some other like really low calorie options, or is this kind of we had a brilliant idea and we're just going to make this one?
We don't have any plans to kind of have it like be like a line extension. It's like we're not going to be like with the Black Light Voodoo Ranger collection and stuff. But really, we're with these kinds of beers. We have another one we're thinking about for next year, which is a lager. It's also kind of lighter, easier drinking. It's a low 4% alcohol. We really kind of let the beer speak to us. It's something that we're constantly tinkering with things, and we are very, like I said, very kind of classically minded kind of brewery, very beer flavored beer kind of brewery. But within that, I mean, beer's 10,000 years older than Jesus, and people are still trying to figure out ways to do different things with it that haven't been done before. So there's a lot to work with within the idea of beer flavored beer, and we're doing it. And so there's a couple different ideas that we've got for next year. We're trying to schedule things where it's like, okay, we're gonna have one big push sort of in January and lead with that. And so but it's not where we're trying to take the brewery to be known as like the light beer craft brewery, which is fine if we are, but that's not kind of our thing. We're mostly interested in just making good, balanced, flavorful beer that you want to drink 2 or 3 of.
So, Kevin, I think you may have actually already kind of answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyhow, because craft beer, we know the industry's in a challenging time right now, and there's a lot of discussions based around what can we do? What can we do? What's next? What's new? What's exciting? Offering more beverages, different beverages, the NA beers, seltzers, a lot we've seen getting into spirits. We see a lot of breweries here in Georgia that do spirits, and especially if they're, I won't jump into our laws again because then I just ramble off on a tangent, but it wasn't that long ago before our breweries could have food, have a restaurant, and breweries could have a distilling license. So, they're expanding there. Hey, we've got food. Come in and eat. Have something here. We offer spirits. So now you can get a cocktail, or the people in your group that don't drink, can do this. So when everybody's looking at new, different, exciting, this and that, and you say beer flavored beer, what are you doing during this time of the industry to make sure that you keep moving forward? Anything different or?
Yeah, what we're doing mostly is making sure that we're focused on fundamentals and flagships, like the things that Nate, was drinking. When you're, a different size brewery, you have different challenges. If you're a brew pub and a lot of the stuff that you sell is like right across the bar, it's a really, it's difficult, but it's a really compelling, business model to constantly be turning things and get people in. And it's like, what do they have that's new at, this particular, brew pub or, and whatever. And that's part of what draws people in, and you want that, on-site stuff. When you get bigger, that just doesn't scale. It's not possible to really do that. And I think a lot of breweries ran into some challenges that were really magnified by the pandemic that were, kind of already in the making. Whereas trying to scale that kind of business model is just not manageable. And you have to, if you're working with distributors and you're in a bunch of different states and things like that, trying to roll a lot of new products just doesn't really work. By the time it gets in and out of, warehouses and you go through, filling out new item forms and all this other kinds of stuff, it's not the same experience. And so I think some of what's going on is you're having those kind of businesses kind of retrench and, abandon sort of the rotation nation type of thing. So, unless you're going to the tap rooms, you're probably not seeing the same level of, the same level of, variety of stuff that's on the shelves. And some of that is also, distributors and retailers getting, some fatigue in terms of carrying a bunch of SKUs and whatnot. That's a whole nother conversation about access to market. But I think, one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to bring, like this year, we're only bringing one new beer to the national distribution, and that's the Black Light. And the rest of it is all focusing on the fundamentals and the priorities that we put together over the last 4 years. So when we do bring something, it's got to be something that's different and worth the conversation. And that's, where kind of the Black Light comes in. Like if we're going to be like, oh, we have yet another sort of hazy IPA. This is like the other hazy IPA, but this time with more Citra or, like that kind of thing. It's just not, frankly, it's not interesting these days. And there's a lot of the craft beer community that wants to try new things and do different stuff, and so you're going to have trial. You're going to have people that will try it. Even if it's the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, a lot of craft is about exploration and experience and this and that. And even if it's terrible, it's like at least you have a story. It's like you cannot believe what I just got on trade or whatever. So one of the things that's bringing into focus is you also have a lot of these people that are trying everything, that are developing their palates, and you have a more educated and a more discerning craft beer customer these days. And so it's not enough just to throw glitter in something and throw it out there in an exploding can and say, hey, here's our new release, because people aren't going to put up with that stuff anymore. So again, that kind of goes back to fundamentals. You have to make flavorful beer, but you have to do new and interesting kind of things with it. You have to totally dial in your foundational stuff, because not all of the stuff that is going to be on the shelf is going to be people wanting to experiment with new, different things. Like, another thing COVID did, it's like when there's a crisis kind of thing, or, people are, watching their money and inflation and stuff. There's a move back to trusted brands. People don't want to gamble all the time. They'll go and look for something and, try something new and something different, kind of as, a treat, something special. But when it comes to time to buy that 12-pack, or you're on your way home and, you're out of beer, or you want to grab a 6 of something or a 4 of something or whatever, you're going to go get something that you already like. And so consistency and just again, going back to fundamentals, just fundamental beer quality and being able to deliver on the promise that, anytime that, we have something that's got the Anderson Valley banner on it, it's got to be dialed in, because, if someone picks up something that they don't like, that carries with the brand. And especially now when people are finding and identifying a lot more with what their favorite brands are because of, things like inflation and just being more discerning consumers, it's more important than ever. So it's a totally unsexy way of going at innovation, but it really has to be. You have to be innovating in the brew house and doing the things that nobody sees to make sure that your beers are more durable on the shelf. Things like, running your lab program, with a lot of rigor, making sure that your packaging line is dialed in. Again, totally unsexy stuff, but it really kind of comes down to, if you're going to bring something kind of new and different, it has to be, it can't be like a one-off sort of, can you believe I drank this sort of thing? Because rotation, at retailers and with distributors, they just don't want that. And consumers are getting a little bit less patient with it. And as a brewery, you don't really want to have to be putting out new packaging, all that kind of things. So really, I think the key right now for breweries is to do, going back to, again, fundamental things really, really well, but then come up with interesting ideas to kind of iterate, how to do that kind of stuff and find ways to do it that other people may not have thought of. But still, it's got to be grounded in something that just tastes good.
It's interesting to see. I'm going to go, Brian, then.
Okay. I
was going to say it's interesting to see, because over the years, there's been so many moments that it's like, is craft beer jumping the shark here? The IBU wars. This is 1,000 IBUs. This is 410. This is whatever. When sour beer started to take hold, there was, gozes. If you've had a traditional goza, they're lightly tart, quite refreshing and lightly tart. And I know out east, I mentioned this several times before, but Westbrook was one of the first to release a goza out here, and theirs will crack your teeth. It's so sour. And then subsequent brewers that did other gozas that may have been a little less sour, people were complaining, that they weren't enough. And then you go into the hop heavy and the pastry everything, and the glitter cans. And Kevin, you talk about, you can do the most ridiculous thing and people are going to try it, but they're not going to come back. I mean, I'm not going to say who did this, but I know at least 3 guys that are in here right now that ordered a beer that was a collaboration with Hormel Chili and was a canned chili flavored beer. So now,
and we thought it was fantastic, right, guys?
Sure. I thought it delivered as promised. I'll say that, but you know what?
Delivered as promised.
It did. Yeah. I enjoy trying the ridiculous stuff like that, but I'm trying it one time and I'm never going back again. I am never going to have a moment when I'm like, man, I really wish I had a beer that tasted like a can of chili. It's just not going to happen.
I was just thinking when Kevin was talking, what I realized is a lot of this like new beer every week is all about FOMO, and FOMO only works if there's a mo portion, the missing out.
Yeah.
If everybody else is doing it, there's no missing out. That model doesn't work. And that model requires a lot of work on both sides, not just the brewers, but the people buying it have to line up. They have to get there. They have to do the thing. They've got to. And so this whole thing is broken down. It's a lot of work, and there's no missing out anymore because we've got all the stuff. And so that you have to focus on quality. You got to be that default buy, or you're not anywhere. I mean,
the other challenge with that people don't really see is that every time you do that, it gets harder as a brewery, because it's like there are breweries out there that do a lot of heavy rotation beers that have kind of run through most all their good ideas. And now they keep on having to make new beers and something different. And a lot of them are, when you start seeing breweries doing like variations on stuff that they did a couple of years ago, and it's like they start describing a release as like, well, it's like this thing, which was a real big fan favorite, but we changed it a little bit like that. Personally, it's kind of like, okay, maybe you should focus on, developing a flagship, because you've evolved to that level. You've done enough R&D with your consumer that you need to kind of do that. And I think that's part of the evolution that's kind of going on. But it's the rotation is a really hard thing to do as a brewer. It's a hard thing to do well. And there's people that do it extremely well that I'm, envious of their technical capabilities and their imagination. But it's challenging, and it's hard to maintain for a long time.
You know, we have Tyler here watching the live stream, and he chimed in, talk about the hazy IPAs. He said, I pass on hazy IPAs anymore because they've just gone too far off the mark. Tropical flavors and citra hops are too much. And, you know, I imagine he's not alone in just saying, you know, you can only say, well, it's juicy and it's hazy and it's tropical and there's citrus notes. You can only say that so many times before it's crying wolf. And, you know, Kevin, I've mentioned this a couple times on the show because I got a lot of grief for this when it happened a few years ago, when our laws changed to allow direct sales at the breweries. We had breweries that went from once a month, once every 2 month release to sometimes 2 new beers a week because they could, you know. And I made the comment, I don't remember exactly how I said it, but I'm like, y'all, this is going to be the case. If there's something brand new every single week, no one's going to care, you know. So it's not even from other breweries, but, you know, just really shooting themselves in the foot. There's beers released now that I would have been extremely excited for 4 years ago that I don't hear anything about. That's Hunapoo's Day down in Tampa happened. Tampa Beer Week and Hunapoo's Day 5 years ago. There's no way you would miss out on that being mentioned 100 times on a beer forum around there. I found out about Tampa Beer Week and Hunapoo's Day from my buddy at Tampa Beer Week posting a picture that he was at Tampa Beer Week. You know, it's just, that's where we're getting to. It's not exciting anymore because not only in Cigar City is a different story about, you know, there's sad story over there with what's been done to Cigar City. But it's interesting, man. And I really do look, I've been thinking as you've been kind of sharing here, Kevin, your philosophy, and the breweries that I go to over and over and over here produce drinking beers. You know, the beers that I can sit down, Halfway Crooks that we talk about a lot, Good Word Brewing. These guys are going to have a nice, a lager, maybe a lighter pale ale. Halfway Crooks has the best Berliner I've ever had in my life. Just a stellar beer. Now, Halfway Crooks doesn't get into those. Good Word does do big, flavorful, complex pastry stouts, and they're delightful. But they are not something. They're not something I'm going to have 3 pints of. You know, it's not something I can sit down and have with a meal and enjoy. So yeah, I hear you, Kevin, and I agree with you. I'd never really thought about it, but you know, absolutely. And I'd say that's not new for me. I just never really thought about it in the past, about the places that, you know, I go back to again and again.
Yeah, I think fatigue is a real thing. You know, it's like, you know, there's a reason why everyone is, you know, been, you know, numb to spam and email overload, the kind of thing. It's like you get, you know, a lot of input, you know, in a short period of time, and then it kind of desensitizes it. And I think the other aspect of it is that there's a natural evolution in craft beer that's going on now, where just the beer alone a lot of times is not enough. And this is particularly visible in, you know, beer festivals and stuff. If all you're doing is you're presenting a bunch of breweries, it's not compelling to people anymore. You know, it's like you have to have something else. We do a beer festival. We're on our 26th one. And it's, you know, it's absolutely, you know, buckanolic and scary. We have, you know, 80 breweries, and they camp on the brewery property here, and that turns into its own community and stuff. And then, you know, there's a lot of, because we're in the middle of a redwood forest in, you know, Mendocino County up here in Northern California, surrounded by antlered bears. But it's like,
it's everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a thing where, I mean, there's people that use it as an annual reunion, like the Humboldt State University, just north of here, their alumni marching band shows up every year and, you know, tromps around and plays marching band songs and stuff. But it's just way bigger than the beer. I mean, the beer is kind of a reason to get together and do that. But if you're a brewery now and all you're offering for someone to come into your tap room or have your experience is just the beer, and this is specifically just taproom experience because you don't have a choice, you know, if you're shipping stuff out, then you're competing with, like, you know, random bars and things like that. And why would you want to do that? There's got to be kind of something more. And then that translates also into, you know, beer festivals and just fatigue of, you know, there's just too many beers. And a lot of times just kind of like, you know, beer release isn't a special thing like it used to be anymore. So there's a lot of beer right there.
Yeah, that's Tyler just chimed in and said he graduated from Humboldt State. So it sounds like he needs to get up there. He needs to get up there for the festival. Then he's missing out.
Man,
I need to ask if he speaks any Boontling.
Yeah, find out.
Yes.
You know, Kevin, as we're talking about things here, as mentioned, I'm drinking a salted caramel porter here, and just want to comment. This is very much a porter first and foremost. You know, it's not the salted caramel first, and that's a thing. You know, a lot of times you see those flavors in the beer. That's going to be what hits you, you know, right in the face is going to be the salted caramel. Those notes are there, but this is a porter. I'm drinking a porter with salted caramel here. So
yeah, and that's really, you know, a lot of philosophy. The great thing about the salted caramel porter is that, I mean, it's total alchemy. There's no flavorings, there's no additives in there. Everything that goes into that beer comes from a bourbon barrel and the grain selection that we use. So there's no, you know, adjuncts, no, you know, whatever stuff that's in there. It's literally, it's all malt and bourbon barrel. And it's also kind of indicative of the style of the brewing team that's here. I've got 4 senior brewers here that have been working together a total of, I think, 86 years. And so they're kind of dialed in.
Okay.
They're kind of dialed in their perspective on a lot of stuff. And so the flavored things that we do, it's like is very similar to what you got there, Tim. Is like, you know, it's like you definitely pick up the flavor, but it's beer that happens to have a flavor, and you notice it, but it is not, you know, the main kind of like, you know, center point of it. Even our gozes too, with our fruits, you know, the fruit is, compared to a lot of other styles, fairly muted. I mean, you know, it's there, something like that, but it's, you definitely know that you're tasting, you know, something from Goslar, you know, that happens to have, you know, sort of fruit overtones in it, rather than tasting, you know, a bit of sour puree.
I tried to tell Phil Farrell that when he judged my peach saison, Kevin, but he wasn't having it. He told me there wasn't enough peach in there. So
Tim's still bitter about that. It's been like a decade.
Yeah, it's been years ago. No, but that's yeah, exactly. I mean, good beer. And you know what? There's some that really put those flavors forward that are good. You know, you can have some, but the more bold a beer is, the less I can drink of it. You know, even this one being a salted caramel porter, I could have a couple of these, you know, where if this was a Southern tier beer, I may love it. It may be delicious, but you know, those, are they still doing the bombers on those? I haven't bought one in so long. I'm not sure, but
I don't think so. I don't think they're bombers anymore. They might be either cans or smaller bottles, but yeah, the bomber days are
22 ounces of that. That'd be a lot to get into.
We used to sell that salted caramel porter. I mean, it's really, you know, drinkable, but it's also 9.5%.
Oh wow! Okay, yeah.
So just so you know, but even like the huge Arker, and then, you know, that I mentioned is a 15.5. We used to sell that in 22s, which is beautiful. Like, which is either, you know, you bring a friend, because like a 22-ounce bottle of huge Arker is equivalent of like, you know, 4 or 5, you know, other, you know, normal beers. So either you bring a friend or you're in for the evening. So
exactly. Yeah. I got to ask, what does huge Arker mean? That is Boontling, correct?
It is a Boontling phrase. And for those people that don't know, Anderson Valley is kind of unique. It's one of the 3 recognized English language lingos. The others are Pidgin and Creole. And so the locals here basically created their own language. And a lot of the historical names of the beers that we used to make were all Boontling phrases. And so huge Arker is a phrase that refers to like a giant explosion. And a lot of people think it's turkey, because we get all of our barrels that we use are from wild turkey. We get them wet from the distillery, and they truck them out to us in big trucks. So all of our stuff comes from them. So for a long time we put turkeys on there, so people thought it meant big turkey. But things like the Barney Flats oatmeal stout. Barney Flats is a place down the road. This guy named Barney used to live there, literally. And then Boont is a word for Boonville. It's the town that's here. You know, Hop-Otten basically means lots of hops. So it's there's a lot of those, and some like super awkward ones, you know, there's like lots of like consonants and apostrophes, and it's just like unwieldy. So now we label things now sort of what they taste like. So our West Coast IPA that we released, I think we put a new one out a year and a half ago. So sort of a modern take on a West Coast, and Nate, the Hop-Otten that you have is one of the classic West Coasts from the early 90s. So you can kind of taste them side by side. They're very different, but we just labeled it. We called it West Coast IPA. Like our Pilsner, the Pilsner.
Your Pilsner calling the Pilsner. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, you know, we try and make it simple for people to understand kind of what
it's
we're
like
doing.
American Cockney over there or something. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Cockney rhyming slang, except
Yeah.
yeah.
It was interesting. A couple of days ago, Brian noticed on Twitter that someone happened to tweet like a screenshot of the Wikipedia page of Boontling. And I was like, Brian's like, oh, this is timely, you know, here going into this because, and I didn't know for the longest time, you know, I saw the beer names and was thinking, hey, those are unique names. And, you know, thought that was super interesting, but I never really thought, you know, I didn't realize it was a language or a dialect, you know.
Oh yeah. And you know, the when we were doing bottles, we're all cans and cardboard now. We got rid of glass and plastic, all of our packaging, but the bottle caps, underneath the bottle caps, we had 100 different bottle caps printed with different Boontling phrases on them. And if you collected them all and can prove you collected them all to one of the people that worked here, who was the keeper of the Hall of Foam, you got your name posted on the website as a member of the Hall of Foam and stuff. And so we had all kinds of phrases there, but it's a lot of creative stuff. I mean, basically it's at its heart, it's like a community series of inside jokes just taken to just extreme levels. Like the name for a dog is the name of this guy's dog that was down the road. You know, a payphone is called a Bucky Walter because they referred to as a nickel as a buck. And a guy named Walter in the Valley was the first guy who had a phone. So it became a Bucky Walter. It's like just
that's so great. That's awesome.
Those are fun.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Have you gotten away from those? I've noticed that a lot of your beers don't have much of the Boontling in them anymore in terms of the names.
Yeah, we have a bit, and partly it's because some of what we said before is like, you know, as the shelves get crowded and you kind of get this sort of like, you know, weird Jackson Pollock-y kind of like, you know, splash of different things, it's harder and harder to kind of take a look at a package and see, you know, from a glance what it would taste like if you were to buy it. So we thought that we were going to do what we could to make that as easy as possible to get people the information they needed to know whether or not they would like what we were putting up there. And so just trying to be clear and, you know, be less fanciful in some stuff. I mean, some of the stuff is like really classic and, you know, we're always going to make it, like the Hot Button, for example. There's one of the foundational West Coast IPAs from back in the day. But then, you know, like I said, the new West Coast IPA is called West Coast IPA. So people can kind of see what it is. And the other thing is you're dealing with a lot of people that really didn't grow up with craft beer as part of their journey that are now running restaurants and they're the buyers at different bars and other things too. And so, you know, not having, you know, some of that history, or, you know, maybe they also do wine and they do everything else and they may not have the patience to want to kind of unravel what, you know, the code words are for what's going on in craft beer. It just frankly makes it easier to understand. And we thought that, you know, if we can get people, you know, what information they needed, you know, to decide whether or not they might like this, we were going to do it. So,
well, Kevin, we've got just a few minutes left, and I know another thing that's really important to Anderson Valley is just sustainability.
Yep.
And you were solar powered in 2005. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're the world's first solar powered brewery.
Interesting.
That must have been difficult.
Yeah, it was like nobody. I mean, it was. I mean, our solar panels right now are almost 20 years old, which is, you know, it's its own thing. We've got a plan to expand our stuff and modernize them a little bit. But I mean, the at the time that, you know, putting the solar panels on top of the cellar roofs here and stuff like that was really forward looking. And it was the original founder of the brewery that did it, a guy named Ken Allen. So my family only bought the brewery in December 2019, so like right before COVID. So I can't even take any credit for a lot of this stuff. I'm just trying to talk about all the cool stuff that people did before me. But being the world's first solar powered brewery was very forward looking. The other thing they did is they moved to the property that we're in right now in 1995. And when they did, they built their own water treatment system. So we have for, you know, 20 something years been drawing all of our water from 10 wells that are on the property here. We have almost 30 acres. And then we're our own water district. We have our own treatment facility where all of our wastewater goes to, and we treat it and we discharge it back in the proper coherence. So we actually have basically a closed loop, water cycle, and we're a zero effluent, zero wastewater manufacturing facility. It's just crazy. But then when you think about it, we've been doing it for 20 something years now. I mean, that's, millions of gallons of water that we've been able to do. So
that's the part that impresses me is you just don't, that's a recent trend with people getting so environmentally conscious. Maybe the last decade is when you've heard more and more about it. I think Lawson's, I think they were a little ahead of the curve too. They did some of that as well, but not so much. Yeah,
there's some place like Maui's doing like incredibly cool stuff. Garrett over at Maui's made a lot of really great decisions about their facility there too and stuff. And so it's becoming more and more of a thing. And I'm the beneficiary of that. We've done some other stuff, recently, a lot of changes in the brewery. We pivoted all of our packaging to aluminum and cardboard to stay away from plastic and glass, and that's allowed us to reduce our trucking of stuff coming in and going out of the brewery by almost 60%, which is a lot of carbon. It's a lot of cash too, so that helps the business. And we're trying to evangelize a little bit and be like, sustainable business is solid business practices. I mean, it's based around the idea of reducing waste, and waste is cash. If you're wasting something, it means you bought it at some point. If you're throwing it out, so it's just kind of good, fiscal business, practices too. So
good for the environment, good for the business. Just makes sense, right?
Sense. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us, talking about Anderson Valley. I've enjoyed your beer for so many years. That was the early days of Georgia beer, when we may have had half a dozen breweries in the state. Anderson Valley was always one I could count on, being on the shelves here and getting. So really great to chat with you, learn a little more about the brewery. Now, if folks want to keep up with what is going on at Anderson Valley, what's going to be the best way for them to do that?
The website is pretty informative, but also Instagram is probably our most effective kind of communication thing right now. And we've got a newsletter. So if you go to the website, we send out a consumer-facing newsletter every month, and so we can keep up on that. But Instagram, I think it's Anderson Valley Beer or Anderson Valley Brewing. We're super easy to find. It's probably the easiest way to keep up with us and see kind of what we're doing and what's going on. You get to see the dogs wandering around the brewery and all the other kinds of fun stuff we do here too.
Good stuff. Awesome. Thank you much, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Y'all, thanks so much for listening in, following along with us this week and every week. We greatly appreciate it. We hope that you all have a fantastic week. If you like what we're doing here, easy thing you can do, follow us on the socials, Instagram, Twitter. Brian's real active. He loves to run his mouth on Twitter. So we are Beer Guys Radio on all the socials there. Check us out. If you really enjoy what we do, we would love your support on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/beerguys. You'll get some pool perks or cool perks. One of the two. You'll get those.
Boontling.
It is Boontling, right? And you'll get invited to our Discord server and such. Beer Guy swag. It's a good time for all. So y'all have a great week. Enjoy spring. Enjoy baseball season. And don't forget to drink local. Cheers. I'm leaving that one in there. My mouse gets out of place, but I paused at the right time to
you did
to make that one work. We've got a little lineup. I don't know what you can see on your end, Kevin, but our little intro and outro music's in that. And the last 2 weeks I've hit the wrong trigger button when we go out, and I put that da-da music out there. So
nice.
Good stuff. Awesome. Well, y'all, we're gonna Kevin, hang out for just a second. We're gonna cut the live stream here because if we don't, Instagram will cut us off at the 1 hour mark. So everybody, thanks for hanging with us. We will see you next week. Cheers.